Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Wednesday, August 16th, 2017. I'll be taking a break starting tomorrow. A little vacation with family in the Midwest. And I expect to be back on August 29th. It may be delayed by a day or two because I'm expecting the new mixer board to arrive while I'm away, and we'll be installing it when I return. America is becoming unhinged. And Donald Trump was Exhibit A, as he held a raucous press availability at Trump Tower in the lobby in New York yesterday. And he undermined the insincere remarks that he had recited from a script at the White House on Monday. And he walked back the delicate balance that his advisors had tried to get him to strike. And he insisted that the handful of Antifa or Black Bloc leftist individuals who were at the Charlottesville protest or the march held by neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups, that they are equivalent to the core group of people who carried Confederate flags, Nazi flags in their torchlit march on Friday night. They were shouting anti-Semitic slogans. And Trump tries to make it out as if these two groups are the same. They're equivalent. And he uses it to justify his initial remarks last Saturday, where he talked about bad behavior on all sides. And Trump is desperate to find this equivalency, which we all know is false. Now, I do want to take a swipe at the corporate media because, with the exception of a New York Times story that I'll cite in a moment, there's been very little coverage that does acknowledge that there were violent extremists wearing black masks. We've seen them at other demonstrations like this before at UC Berkeley, the Milo Yiannopoulos little skirmish. And it's not fair to anyone to just try to bury their participation and claim that they didn't exist. But their role, in my view, and I have reviewed a lot of footage and a lot of coverage of Charlottesville, and I think there were maybe a dozen or a handful more of the so-called Antifa. And it's funny to hear corporate media call them Antifa. They're not really sure how to pronounce that street term. But Trump really exposed himself, and at one point his tongue slipped, and he identified himself as part of the alt-right. He said us. And he truly sees everything in an us versus them frame. He is unable to rise above his own biases and his own inner weaknesses. And he is a divider. While he claims to be desperately trying to unite the American people. And his idea of unity is that we all just adopt his bizarre notions of law and order, of freedom to protest, and that right is white, and white is right. Those are his sentiments. That's what he truly believes. Quote, I think there's blame on both sides. You had a group on one side that was bad. You had a group on the other side that was also very violent. Nobody wants to say that. I'll say it right now. And he was sputtering in anger at the fake news and at the media. And he claimed, I've seen the pictures and you've seen the same pictures too. And he introduced to the mainstream the term that's been floating around in the Fox News universe, and I've heard Sean Hannity use it so frequently, it's ridiculous. It is the term alt-left. Now, I will agree that alt-right is a concoction of recent vintage. And nobody knows exactly what it means, but it's a way to describe Steve Bannon and the Nationalists and the whole Trump movement as separate from the conservative mainstream, if you will, of the Republican Party. And alt-right really was a term applied to media outlets like Breitbart in order to separate them from the legacy National Review, the Weekly Standard, and other fonts of conservative thought. And so there is no alt-left. Sean Hannity tries to make it out like every non-Fox media outlet is part of the alt-left, whatever that is. And as you know, you can't lump the corporate media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the television networks, with the work of independent media outlets on the left, and I claim to be one of those. But we all get just lumped together because if you're not with the right, then you're part of the far left. That's really all they can manage to decipher. So the New York Times reports that Trump was trapped there at Trump Tower without his wife or young son, consuming hours of television, which led to his rising fury and the presidential rant on Tuesday. And this, of course, helps divide the Republican Party. It's a very expensive, costly way to do it. And when I say costly, I'm talking about the psychic damage to the rest of us. But you got Paul Ryan, the speaker, who didn't single Trump out, but he said white supremacy is repulsive. There can be no moral ambiguity. Ileana Rose-Lehtinen, congresswoman from Florida, said blaming both sides for Charlottesville? No. Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, said white nationalists in Charlottesville were 100% to blame and wagged his finger at the president for suggesting otherwise. The white supremacy groups will see being assigned only 50% of blame as a win. We cannot allow this old evil to be resurrected. And today there was a memorial service in Charlottesville for Heather Heyer, the 32-year-old woman who was mowed down by the white nationalist in his Dodge Charger. And I was touched by the comments of her mother and her father. Her mom's name is Susan Bro, B-R-O. I'd rather have my child, but if I've got to give her up, by golly, we're going to make it count. I want this to spread. I don't want this to die. This is just the beginning of Heather's legacy. And it's reported that she identified as a socialist, a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, at least I've read in one account. Her father, Mark Heyer, said she wanted to put down hate. And for my part, we just need to stop all this stuff and just forgive each other. Kind of reminiscent of the African-American who was beaten in Los Angeles, Rodney, I can't think of Rodney's last name. Can't we just all get along? And Trump himself, who will pick up the telephone and call all kinds of people at all hours, has not managed to locate the number of the Heyer family and call to express his sympathies. He did put out a tweet, which is hard to believe is sincere. He tweeted, "Memorial service today for beautiful and incredible Heather Heyer, a truly special young woman. She will be long remembered by all." I mean, come on. We know who you are. We know that's bullshit. And, of course, the president's walk back and revisionism expressed in New York yesterday was greeted by the white supremacists. David Duke, KKK leader. "Thank you, President Trump, for your honesty and courage to tell the truth." Richard Spencer, the white nationalist leader who was there in Charlottesville along with David Duke. "Trump's statement was fair and down to earth," he said. So even Marco Rubio predicted that accurately. And what I find interesting here is that when we talk about people on both sides, the right in this country goes out of its way to separate itself from the virulent elements that it strokes and stokes and welcomes into its political activities. So I heard Rush Limbaugh this morning trying to rewrite history and explain that anybody who is affiliated with the Klan is by default a Democrat. Now, that was true 100 years ago. The Democratic Party was the Jim Crow Party in the South, and most Klansmen were Democrats. But that hasn't been true for at least 50 years, if not 70 years. But the Republicans love to try to tag the Klan on the Democrats. And almost as laughable, I heard Limbaugh say that Nazis are socialists, and so just that's real clear they're leftists. I mean, it is bizarre. And to be fair, I'm seeing a lot of my progressive friends espouse violence against alleged Nazis, saying that peaceful means have not worked and that we need to up the game. And I, for one, will have no part of that. I think the best way to deal with these people is to ignore them. Honor their First Amendment rights, let them have their marches, but don't go and punch them and send, black bloc people. And we have a hard time, eliminating the black bloc influence from progressive protests and other events. Now, I often criticize the New York Times, but today they published a good piece about the so-called alt-left and that Fox term. Linda Qiu is the reporter on this. She writes, Antifa, or anti-fascist activists, certainly used clubs and dyed liquids against the white supremacists in Charlottesville. And this is the thread, the shred of evidence that Trump blows up to make it seem like they were equivalent in numbers and in violence to the central core group that sponsored this event and attracted people from all over the country. And the article says that comparing Antifa to James Fields, the man who drove the Charger, is like comparing a propeller plane to a C-130 transport. That's a quote from Brian Levin at the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, California State University, San Bernardino. He went on, using the fact that some counter-protesters were in fact violent creates a structural and moral false equivalency that is seriously undermining the legitimacy of this president. J.J. McNabb, a fellow in the program on extremism at George Washington University, she says Antifa and the Black Bloc, the far left today, engaging in street brawls and property damage, while reprehensible, is not domestic terrorism. And yesterday I cited the numbers, based on the last 7 or 8 years, that violent extremism has been a function of right-wing and nationalist individuals in this country. 74% of the cases, only 2% can be attributed to the left, and the balance is a category that includes Muslim and related extremists. But if you look at the long arc, going all the way back to 1948 and up to 2013, 43% of radicalized individuals in this country espoused right-wing ideologies, and 21% for the left. Now, that period includes the Vietnam War protest period, when there were many violent leftist events. We find, quote, that the right groups and the jihadi groups are more violent than the left, said Gary LaFree at the University of Maryland's National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism. And the far right, represented by those who showed up in Charlottesville, has a scattered membership of a few 100,000 across the country, compared with a few thousand Antifa activists nationwide. And Professor Levin, that's J.J. Levin from George Washington, said they're less structured, they're less organized, they're active on social media, but not to the extent of the others. They don't have the entree into and oxygen of support from the mainstream left. And I just mixed up that citation. That's not McNabb from George Washington. That is Professor Levin from San Bernardino. Just wanted to get that correct. So as over the last few days, CEOs have been jumping ship from various advisory panels that Trump appointed them to. And I saw that Rich Trumka of the AFL-CIO has resigned from one of those panels. I don't know what the hell he had in mind when he accepted the appointment. But so many CEOs have bailed, and a group of them on a conference call led by Stephen Schwartzman of the Blackstone Group and one of Trump's confidants. Well, they were getting ready to resign en masse, and so Trump just ditched the whole thing. He has disbanded his advisory panels so that he doesn't have to face the humiliation of all the people who bailed out and the messages of rebuke that their actions represented or that they stated when they made those moves. Here in San Francisco, at Crissy Field, which is part of the Presidio, that's a decommissioned Army base that is adjacent to the Golden Gate Bridge on the southern side, the San Francisco side. The Presidio is a huge now national park. And Crissy Field is right along San Francisco Bay, not too far from the southern towers of the Golden Gate Bridge. So a group called Patriot Prayer has been issued a permit for August 26th. For a rally at Crissy Field, you could put 10 or 20,000 people in there. And Dianne Feinstein, our senior senator, says, I don't think it makes sense to have any kind of potentially volatile group in an area where families gather. And Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leader in the House, said the National Park Service's decision to permit a white supremacist rally raises grave and ongoing concerns about public safety. But there is a real legitimate issue that every American has a right under the First Amendment to assemble and to speak. And I don't think we should deny them that right. I think we should stop confronting them and stop giving them attention. Now, they may lash out and engage in aggression on their own. But that is much easier to deal with than the black bloc, Antifa kind of underground way of trying to teach these guys a lesson. They can't learn a lesson. They aren't interested in that. And if you confront them and fight them with fists and with sticks, they will next reach for their guns. And I just think that this is the wrong path to take. One of my friends on Facebook, citing a recent effort to marginalize neo-Nazis in Germany, reported that what people did, the opposition, they started raising money. They started sponsoring the individual neo-Nazis. And they said they would contribute to the other side, to other groups, an amount of money for each mile or each kilometer that one of these jokers completed on a march or a walk or a rally. Now, I think that's a novel idea, and it's worth exploring. In Lexington, Kentucky, there is also a planned white rally of some sort, and even Senator Mitch McConnell has counseled against it. These are unusual times. And in my San Francisco Chronicle today, I've linked to an op-ed by Ted Rahl. You may know his cartoons. He also is a writer. And I agree with Ted Rahl. His central point in the sub-headline, if you fire a fascist for his or her political views, you are a fascist. Yesterday, I expressed my opposition to the doxing of people who may have participated in the rallies, even the hateful speech in Charlottesville. There was a case of mistaken identity in one instance. But I just think if you apply these kinds of tactics, they are going to be applied to you. This is the big risk that a lot of people don't see. That by lowering our standards and lowering ourselves to their level, that we are making changes that we may regret long term and that can be turned against us. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Joe Carson, the longtime whistleblower in the Department of Energy, Cheryl Fleming, Susan Gavet, Carl Howard. Oh, and let's add Tim McKay. He's a very, very staunch supporter. I really appreciate each and every one of you. You helped me form this community, and we keep it going. So thank you to those who do subscribe. And this is, before my vacation break, my last pitch to you. If you're not currently a subscriber, why don't you surprise me? I'd love to see 10 new subscribers by the time I get back from vacation. All you have to do is click on peterbcollins.com, look at the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and you can choose from $5 a month, $10, $20, or $50 annual subscription. I often fail to mention that we've got a Screamin' app at the Apple App Store for your iPad and iPhone. It's only $2.99. So find a way to support me and pull the trigger, will you? So in the middle of the night, work crews in Baltimore went out and dismantled statues that honored Confederate heroes. Mayor Catherine Pugh, with the support of the City Council, a vote on Monday, said the mayor has the right to protect her city. For me, the statues represented pain, and not only did I want to protect my city from any more of that pain, I also want to protect my city from any of the violence that was occurring around the nation. We don't need that in Baltimore. Now, I understand the sentiment. I understand that because there are white nationalists with guns around, that doing it in the middle of the night is a safer way to achieve this. But again, we have to look at how this could be used against our own values. And for example, in Seattle, there's a statue of Lenin. And there are a group of right-wingers who have started what they call Operation Lenin Down. And they are planning to respond to the removal of Confederate statuary by removing this statue of Lenin. And I don't have a particular investment in the Lenin statue. I don't have any investment in the Confederate statues. But I have a hard time having our history revised and having this done in a way that isn't really comprehensive. We still haven't resolved what to do about Woodrow Wilson in Princeton. And the Washington Post points out today, at the nation's capital with an O, the Capitol building, there is the National Statuary Hall. Each state gets to contribute 2 statues to Statuary Hall. So that means that there are 100 statues. There are 12 statues of Confederate soldiers and politicians, and only 4 African Americans. The blacks include Martin Luther King, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, and Rosa Parks. The last 2 have only been there for 4 years. But 12 of them memorialize individuals who fought for the Confederacy or were active in Confederate politics. And when Trump conflates Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis with Thomas Jefferson and his fellow slaveholder George Washington, these are very different characterizations. And while I deplore the slaveholding of our founding fathers, they were not traitors to the nation. They didn't try to form a separate nation through secession. And maybe Trump just doesn't care about history or is just ignorant. Now, this one scratches my head. The Guardian newspaper today has a story. Amazon stock market value falls by $5 billion after critical Trump tweet. And the tweet hammers Amazon for essentially destroying retail in the United States. Trump tweeted, "Towns, cities, and states throughout the U.S. are being hurt, many jobs being lost." But that's really Walmart's fault. And Amazon is really a predator of a different stripe. Now, I don't own any Amazon stock. It wouldn't really bother me if Trump wants to battle Jeff Bezos. I think this is really just cover for Trump's anger at the Washington Post, which Bezos owns personally. It's not part of his Amazon empire. But I took a look before I sat down here. The stock market is closed, and Amazon stock is up almost $8 today at $986 a share. Now, it did peak at $1,030 or even more in the middle of July, which temporarily made Bezos the richest man in America or in the world. But I can't find any substantiation for the Guardian's claim that Trump's tweet caused the market cap to drop by $5 billion. Down there in the corrupt zone of the place called Alabama, they had an election yesterday, and the Bible thumper, Roy Moore, the former Chief Justice of their state Supreme Court, he's been bounced twice from the court, once for his insistence on installing a statue, a monument to the Ten Commandments at the courthouse. But yesterday he prevailed in a special election to fill the Senate seat vacated by Jeff Beauregard Jim Crow Sessions. And the Bible thumper Roy Moore got 32%, placed first, and Luther Strange, the temporary senator who was appointed in a backroom deal with disgraced and now resigned former Governor Bob Riley, he got just 32%, and he was backed by Mitch McConnell, millions of dollars from Washington super PACs, and an endorsement from Trump himself. Mo Brooks, the motormouth Republican conservative, came in with just about 20% of the vote in third place. And I love this comment from Roy Moore. He said, "The attempt by the silk-stockinged Washington elitists to control the vote of the people of Alabama has failed." Now, I'd like an intrepid reporter to tell me, was Roy Moore wearing socks when he said that? Was he sporting bare ankles? Or was he, wearing American-made cotton white socks? I don't know. Anyway, if you want more details on this, I always recommend Roger Schuler's blog, legalschnauzer.blogspot.com. And if you can help with a contribution over there, the Schulers can always use your support. Now, today, the New York Times has a story on the homepage that makes it seem like they've actually found evidence and a human being to support the notion that it was Russian hackers who got into the DNC server and gave emails and other information to WikiLeaks. And what a disappointment this story is. Because while the New York Times has one contrary quote to the overarching theme of this article, they don't even reference that there is a dispute about whether the DNC breach was a leak by an insider or a hack by an outsider. They are still clinging to the hack scenario. And they don't even acknowledge that other possibilities exist. So the story is based on a hacker from Ukraine named Profexor. And the Profexor suddenly stopped blogging back in January, and they claim that he went to the Ukrainian police and has now become a witness for the FBI. We don't know this man's name, and the article in paragraph 5 or 6 concedes there is no evidence that Profexor worked, at least knowingly, for Russia's intelligence services, but his malware apparently did. Well, it turns out that the malware that he may have been the author of was used in a couple of different hacks, one related to a Ukrainian election, and the other, we're told, the Cozy Bear intrusion into the DNC servers. But none of this comes with any evidence that is meaningful. It is more informed speculation that is based on the anonymous leaks and the narrative that has been compiled to date. Here's the contrary quote. It came from Jeffrey Carr, author of a book on cyber warfare. There is not now and never has been a single piece of technical evidence produced that connects the malware used in the DNC attack to the GRU, FSB, or any agency of the Russian government. In the paragraph before, the Times acknowledges the absence of reliable witnesses, leaving ample room for President Trump and others, I guess that's me, to raise doubts about whether Russia was really involved in the DNC hack. I invite you to read this article critically. And if you come away with a different take than what I've just offered, please email me and share it. Here's another claim that undermines the article in a serious way. It remains unclear how extensively Profexor interacted with the Russian hacking team. That means they don't actually know whether he interacted with them at all. And the bottom line of all this that the article doesn't acknowledge is that these attributions, the so-called digital fingerprints, can be faked. And Profexor's hacking tools showed up in Vault 7. The cache of CIA and NSA hacking tools that somehow wound up on the dark web. So I am unmoved by this. It is just more of the same, with a fresh new angle and a lot of references to Fancy Bear. I was surprised. I get emails from this right-wing group, Judicial Watch. They do some good things. They were fighting to expose Hillary's emails last year, and they do it for partisan reasons, but, they operate using legal methods. And in a piece authored by a man described as their chief investigative reporter, Micah Morrison, they detail the charges against Benjamin Netanyahu that are being investigated in Israel. And last week I told you about Case 1000 and Case 2000, but there's a Case 3000 and a Case 4000 too. And I won't take time to detail this for you verbally and just read the article, but I have linked to it, and I think it's fascinating. As far as I know, Judicial Watch is a pretty staunch supporter of the State of Israel. And to see them report what is pretty accurate truth about Benjamin Netanyahu, I find surprising. A couple of the members of the data team who worked for the Trump campaign have formed a group called Look Ahead America. Their purpose to identify disaffected rural and working class Americans who either do not vote or are not on the voter rolls and get them registered. They're calling themselves the Acorn of the Right. And that rankles me because Acorn was a legitimate service organization that was taken down by a phony James O'Keefe edited series of videos. And the Democrats didn't lift a finger to prevent the railroading of Acorn. Oh, and by the way, Look Ahead America is also going to seek to invalidate fraudulent votes and fight that mythical voter fraud. And finally today, last week in our Friday podcast that was on Facebook Live video, I was talking with a caller about the situation with South Korea. Actually, I mean North Korea. But one of the points I made was that after this torrent of threats that Trump made that have heightened the risk of a military exchange with North Korea, I said that one of the things that we could do that wouldn't cost us a thing would be to cancel the war games that are scheduled to begin on Monday jointly with the U.S. and South Korea. And it turns out that these war games are computer simulations. The war games are carried out in a large bunker in mountains south of Seoul. So this doesn't involve, jets and tanks and humans or ships. Now, I don't know why North Korea considers this to be such a threat that they run computer simulations, but hey, give it up. We don't need to do this. And this could be a way to open some sort of dialogue or negotiations with Kim Jong-un. Before I go today, Gary Chu tells me that he has seen the best movie so far in 2017. Take it away, Gary.
Even cast members of Lucky Logan don't really know who Rebecca Blunt is. A person so named is credited with writing the screenplay for this new Steven Soderbergh film. If a woman, perhaps she's a sister to the actor Emily Blunt. But I'd say no about that. For all we know, Rebecca might be a dude. On the other hand, after seeing Lucky Logan, everyone should readily understand just how freaking clever Rebecca's script is. And that's astoundingly ironic, too, since the movie is populated with a cadre of wholly total half-wits, mostly male, who have larceny in their hearts and Easy Street in their dreams. Lucky Logan, PG-13, presents to an audience with all the veracity of a Roadrunner cartoon you used to see after the coming attractions and before the main feature. Almost everything that happens in this exquisitely timed caper is pure perfection. By the way, it's not animated like the Roadrunner. All of the shenanigans are brought off by modern-day West Virginia hillbillies who, if in a polling place, would mark their X for Donald J. Trump. That's about as clear as I can put it to you. Jimmy Logan, played by Tatum Channing, is a former high school football star, now with a gimpy leg these days. The mine business he subterraneously works for dumps Jimmy when someone reports Logan limps. Big mining companies are sensitive to any kind of liabilities that might ensue with an employee. Our hero is pretty pissed. Out of work, Jimmy and his brother Clyde, played by Adam Driver, who lost his left hand on duty in Iraq, come up with a notion to rob the Charlotte NASCAR Raceway on one of its biggest days. Clyde's just a barkeep at the local duct-tape beer joint. The Logans could sure enough use a pickup bed load of that NASCAR cash now, couldn't they? Just so happens the raceway is snugged up to the mine where Jimmy got fired from. How convenient. I said it's sort of like a Roadrunner cartoon. With the right digging and jostling around, the Logans could gain entry to the underground speedway money cache that's adjacent to the depths of where Jimmy had a job. The cache is jammed with plastic money tubes that are connected up to the ticket booths the fans go through when putting down those hard-earned Yankee dollars of theirs. Don't use that term when you talk to them about money, though. Those greenbacks do some big-time swishing on their way to a bigger pile in the raceway basement. Oh, my God, but the Logans need a safe-cracking kind of feller to completely bring off the heist. Golly, the only friend they've got in that department is Joe Bang, played by Daniel Craig. But Joe's in the joint. He's locked up like most of Vladimir Putin's coastal waterways are when the snow flies. The scheme the boys cook up unfolds before your very eyes while telling this totally unbelievable story that will cause a pretty good deal of laughing on your part. Some slow places show up in the movie, but not to the extent that you want to go out in the lobby and just eat tepid popcorn with extra butter. 007 is a redneck convict without a trace of a Brit accent? Oh, that's a big 10-4, folks. Did I mention that Craig is an excellent actor? It's a role that the great Sean Connery would not have touched with anybody's 10-foot fly rod. Mucho kudos to Craig. What a sport that feller is, anyhow. There are many other colorful characters to contend with. Dwight Yoakam, whom you saw in Sling Blade in 1996 with Billy Bob, plays Warden Burns. He runs the Bar Motel, where Joe Bang currently resides. Silly and talented Seth MacFarlane is hard to recognize as a bearded Brit race car driver you'll just want to simply run over when you see what kind of a bloke he is. Katie Holmes is Jimmy's ex-wife, now ensconced in a fancy 3-story home with their little girl named Sadie, and played cutely by Farrah McKenzie. Sadie's going to be a beauty queen when she grows up. Yes, sir. And Jimmy's ex has also remarried. Then, late in the third act, a female FBI agent appears after much of the excitement ebbs. She's going to bring everybody to justice. That would be Hilary Swank playing the part of Agent Grayson. And well, she means business, I'll tell you. Lucky Logan is a breath of fresh Appalachian mountain air for the grown-ups, mostly in that it shows you how the other half steals. Most movies today, and news reports as well, more often relate how the upper 1% does that. For the Peter B. Collins Podcast, I'm Gary Chu, over here in Sacramento.
Thank you, Gary Chu. Maybe I'll check out Lucky Logan while I'm on vacation. Thanks for listening. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.